Good morning. As Craig mentioned, my name is Pete Stavros. I'm a partner in the New York office, and I run our industrials group. And as an industrials investor, as you can imagine, I spend most of my time with manufacturing companies. And within a manufacturing company, the majority of the workforce are blue-collar workers who are paid an hourly wage. In fact, that's usually the vast majority of the employee base. And despite the fact that that group of employees is so large and so important, what we find time and time again is that the relationship between the company that they work for, but between the blue-collar workers and the company that they work for, is not a positive one. And oftentimes is outright contentious, and of course that impacts performance. And so what we've been spending the better part of the past decade doing is trying to understand why that relationship is not working, what we can do to improve it, and thereby improve the performance of our companies and drive some of the operational change that Johannes and Craig have talked about, and also positively impact the lives of these employees. So that's what I'd like to talk about for the next 25 minutes or so. So this history of poor employee relations when it comes to blue-collar workers, this goes back generations. This is, of course, where the labor union movement started. This is actually a picture of my dad. He was a blue-collar worker. He worked for a construction company in Chicago and earned an hourly wage. And I just remember at the dinner table countless conversations about conflict between the workers and their employer. So as a kid growing up, I was able to see this through the eyes of an employee, and now as an adult, I get to see it through the eyes of the company, and it's been kind of fascinating to see both sides of it. There are a lot of reasons, I'm sure, why this relationship doesn't work, but one of the really obvious ones that I've observed is the hourly wage itself creates a huge misalignment of incentives. So you've got, on the one hand, the employer who cares about quality, cost, on-time delivery, and the employee who just cares about hours because that's exclusively how they are paid. So if you look at the bottom line, just as one example, think about a situation where the employer falls behind on a job. They've got upset customers, they're working overtime to try and catch up, it's very expensive, terrible thing for the company. It's actually a great thing for the employee. They get more hours and they get time and a half or double time for the overtime hours. So if you're the employer and you've got the vast majority of your employee base as blue-collar workers with exactly the wrong incentives, how do you engage? How do you behave? And what's very common is to just apply an extreme amount of oversight and monitoring of your employees. And as you can imagine, the employees often don't react well to this. They evade oversight where they can, and where they can't, they meet the bare minimum of expectations. So over years, this really devolves into a situation where the company gives up on the people give up on their jobs, they stop investing themselves in their work, and worker morale is very poor. So here's what we've been trying to do in industrials. We've been trying to use our portfolio as a bit of a laboratory to experiment with ways of changing this relationship. And we're in a great position to do this because, of course, we're constantly buying new companies, and that moment of change in ownership is a golden opportunity because people are not only open to change, they are expecting change. So what I'd like to do now for about 10 minutes is take you through a case study. This is one of these examples that Johannes and Craig both referred to. This had been owned by private equity 3 times prior to KKR. A lot of head scratching when we bought the business. What could you possibly do with this? This had been owned by smart money for 20 years. And one of the things that had not been addressed was engagement and using the whole workforce to drive the operations of the business. The company makes overhead garage doors like the one you see here in the picture. They're based in Arthur, Illinois. And when we bought the business, the company had, from top to bottom, about 800 employees, each one represented here by a purple dot. Now, 600 of the 800 were hourly workers in the manufacturing plant, and another 54 were truck drivers paid by the mile, so very similar to being paid by the hour. And then you've got the balance here of salaried office employees. Now, of the total employee base, 18 had ownership in the business when we bought the company. So those are the green dots in the lower left corner. And those 18 people got a payout of $57 million when we bought the business, and $30 million went to 2 people. So this is really a microcosm of the industrial world in this country. The vast majority of employees barely getting by on an hourly wage, and then a small segment with ownership. And as everyone in this room knows, capital is so much more productive than labor. That's the group getting ahead. And the getting ahead is concentrated in the hands of a couple of people. So this is kind of what we see in almost every situation. So you see something like that and you wonder, geez, I wonder what employee morale might be like. Well, in the manufacturing world, one other thing to look at if you want to get a quick snapshot of how employees are being treated is look at safety. And this is something we see time and again. The workers are usually not being taken care of at the most basic of levels. They're not even getting sent home safely at night. And so what we're showing you here is the total recordable incident rate. It is an OSHA mandated statistic which shows you for every 100 workers in the manufacturing plant, how many are getting injured on the job every year. And this simple first aid does not count. These are typically trips to the hospital. So you can see when we bought the business, there were 14 out of every 100 workers with, let's say, hospital visits every year. So as I mentioned, we had 600 in the plant. So 6 times 14 would be 84 hospital visits per year. Over the course of, let's say, a 5-year hold period, that would be most of the workforce, which is kind of a staggering failure on the part of the company. So we did the first employee survey the company had ever seen shortly after we bought the business, and not surprisingly, the results were terrible. We had a 30% response rate, and 90% of the results were well below benchmark. And in our favorite question, most people who filled out the survey said it would have absolutely no impact. And unfortunately, the survey company got rid of that question, so we can't track our performance against it. So, as is always the case, this lack of engagement will manifest itself in poor performance. And so the company had, as an example, quality challenges that match their safety challenges. So if you have a safety issue, you will always have a quality issue because it reflects a lack of process or a process that is out of control. And that's what we had at CHI. There was also no margin growth despite pretty robust volumes as the housing market was recovering. And there was excess working capital in the business. This is a build-to-order model, and they had still a ton of inventory in the business. So we bought the company, we brought in new leadership, established a new set of priorities, we brought a real process orientation to the business, and then importantly, we rolled out this employee engagement model that we've been developing over the better part of the past decade. And this is constantly evolving. We're trying to improve it all the time. But as it stands today, there's 3 legs to the stool on our engagement model. The first one is investing in the workforce, making people feel cared for, showing you want to invest in their professional development, making everyone in the business an owner, down to the janitor who sweeps the floors in the manufacturing plant, and then engaging with the community through the company. So this kind of community service is all about building pride in the organization. And I'd like to just talk through each of these in the next few slides. So first, investing in the workforce. Again, this is all about making people feel cared for, and we typically would have training in everything from lean manufacturing through to Salesforce effectiveness. In this case, the burning platform, as I showed you, was and remains safety of the employees. So you can see in a short period of time, we've cut the injury rate in half, but you can also see it's still well above the benchmark. And there's 2 things that we're doing right now that we think will take us below the benchmark and hopefully on a path to world-class safety. The first one, and I think these 2 will give you another sense for how this employee base feels they've been treated over time. The first one is we're changing the staffing model. So what the company had done was, because the business is so seasonal, they would lay people off right before the holidays during the slow period and then rehire in the spring to save on labor costs. That was obviously a morale issue, but it was also a safety issue because the people that you let go of right before the holidays, they can't afford to wait around till the spring, so they would go off and do other things, which meant you had a portion of your workforce that was new every spring, and then they hit their first busy season in the summer, and those were the ones who all got hurt. So we're changing that. We're going to keep the labor force intact through the slow season. It's going to cost us a little bit of money on labor, but it's going to have a huge safety benefit and a huge morale boost. Second thing is we're air conditioning the facility. So in the height of busy season in July and August, it gets to be 110 degrees in the plant. And in the trailer that we're loading the doors into, it can get to be 125 plus in the trailer. And so you've got people running around like mad to meet production requirements, and all they've got are a couple of fans to try and cool them off. And so they get hurt, they make mistakes. So we think that's going to have another big morale boost and safety benefit. So that's the first thing we do, invest in the people. The second thing is, as I mentioned, make everyone an owner in the business. So you go from a situation like this to one where everyone participates in the financial upside in the business. And to give you a sense for how we do this with very large option plans, so much larger than a typical private equity firm would do. And it's important that we use options because we obviously only want our investors getting diluted to the extent there's real performance. And in terms of order of magnitude, what we're talking about, if you take one of our truck drivers at CHI, we gave them an opportunity to invest up to $5,000 in the deal right alongside KKR on the same terms. They could do zero, and we'd still give them free options. But if they did the maximum of $5,000, we gave them free options that under our base case we think will be worth $200,000. So this is really life-impacting amounts of money. Now, we've learned that it's more complicated than just sprinkling ownership around a company and then flying back to New York and watching the results flow in. As Johannes mentioned, we are deeply, deeply involved in our companies from an operating perspective. We also do a lot to try and have this ownership be real for folks and drive performance and make it more than just a feel-good story. So part of that is education. A lot of people have never owned equity before, and these options are options in a levered capital structure, so it's a complicated concept to explain. We figured out how to do it over time. We've gotten better at it. And then what we do is share a lot of information about our business plan. So it's quasi kind of open book management. We share the business plan, where we're headed, how much money we make, where we expect margins to go, and then we try and tie the high-level plan down to all the different functions of the business so people know how they're contributing and how what they're doing every day creates value. We do a lot to make the ownership feel real. We do some things that would sound silly to people in this room. We print physical stock certificates. We've found that the physical manifestation of ownership really makes this feel real and tangible to people. Even though the stock of CHI it's a private company, it's not publicly traded, we actually open fidelity accounts for people so that as our valuation mark improves, they see value being created for themselves and their families. And then the most impactful thing you can do, which we try and do every chance we get, is to pay an early dividend, even if it's tiny, because there's nothing quite like people receiving a check to understand that the ownership is real. And that's what we did at CHI. And what we wanted to do was just play a 60-second video to bring you onto the shop floor in Arthur, Illinois, and have you feel what the enthusiasm that starts to build pretty quickly. So this is only a little over a year into the investment. We paid a very, very small dividend. It was only out of excess cash. So for the hourly workers, the range was $1,300 to $4,000, which may not seem like a lot, but you've got to keep in mind we're the fourth private equity firm to show up. They've never seen anything like this. Also, we emphasized that if we kept performing, we could deliver many, many, many times this amount of money to people. And lastly, keep in mind, half of America has no savings or negative net worth. A lot of those people operate in manufacturing facilities. So as you watch the video, also just keep in the back of your mind what was when we showed up in terms of employee morale, safety, lack of investment in the facility, the staffing model, and now everything's starting to turn around. So if we can roll that quick video. So if you've been here less than 2 years and you're full-time, we're paying $1,300. 2 to 4 years, $2,400, and 4 years or more, almost $4,000. And these amounts, and the payout will happen, I think this is Friday, tomorrow.
When you have employees feel like they are part of the company, they do better, perform better.
So it makes you feel more empowered to talk to upper management and to make sure that you get heard with ideas that you have or thoughts that you may have about something.
I think it completely changed the way everybody thinks.
So that's obviously what we're going for, is to get people to think differently about the company and their role at the company. So those are the first two legs to the stool I mentioned: investing in the people, making everyone an owner. The third part is this idea of getting the company involved in the community. And this is one of these things a lot of companies do on a check-the-box basis. But what we found is if you do it in a meaningful way through the work of all the employees, it can really have an impact on how proud people feel to go to work every day. And so what we do is we find a charity that has a need for the product that our company manufactures. So it's tied in almost naturally with the mission of the company. And then we strike a formal partnership where we provide financial support, free product, free training, and then we get the employees involved in the charity. So in this case, Homes for Our Troops builds customized homes for wounded vets, like the one you see here in the picture. So we provide garage doors all over the country for wounded vets, and then in the local community, we're sponsoring entire homes. And when those homes are getting built, we basically rent buses and bus our employee base out to the home and help build it. And I've been at CHI shareholder meetings where sometimes you get a bigger reaction out of some people through this work we're doing in the community than you even do around the ownership stuff. So we did 1 year later, we did our second employee survey, and the results were dramatically better. We went from a 30% response rate to an 80% response rate, with the results going from 90% below benchmark to 60% above benchmark. So still a long way to go, but a huge improvement in just 1 year. One of the questions that our investors often ask us is, can you give us an example of changed behavior? What does an engaged employee look like? So here's an example. This is Larry Beal. He's 60 years old. He's been with CHI for many years. And Larry invested the maximum amount, the $5,000 I referred to earlier. So he's looking at a very significant potential payout. And Larry is very, very focused on helping the company get better. And here's, I'm going to give you one example. So, as I've mentioned, we spend a lot of time directly involved in our businesses, and so we do things like ride along with truck drivers making deliveries to really understand, how value is being created and where additional opportunities might come from. This is an actual route that Larry and I drove together. This is from Arthur, Illinois. This is his central Wisconsin and western Wisconsin route. So you can see he goes almost to Minneapolis, all the way up almost to Duluth, back to the center part of the state. And then we inexplicably send him to northern Michigan to deliver one garage door. And so Larry says, hey, Pete, before I was an owner, all I cared about was miles. It's 90 cents a mile. You could have me driving around in circles for all I care. But I really wanted to show you that this is what I'm seeing out of our scheduling department, and there's no way we're making money on this stuff because I know what you pay me to deliver a door, and I know roughly what we're charging for a door. So you go through the math, and of course Larry's right, and we're making no money. And this was reasonably pervasive in the scheduling department. And what was happening was we were overriding our own route scheduling system to accommodate small deliveries. Our heart was in the right place. We wanted to accommodate small customers and small orders, but it was costing us a lot of money. And this is what happens when employees start to become engaged, is it almost becomes an issue of prioritizing all these ideas. So to touch on what both Johannes and Craig mentioned, here's an example. Again, we were the fourth private equity firm to show up. It's a building products company, so people said margins were already very good at 21%. KKR must be crazy. Why would they be buying this? And you can see in under 3 years, we're pushing 30% in the EBITDA margin. And we've taken almost all the working capital out of the business. So this started at 12% of revenue, which in the industrials world is totally respectable, probably top quartile. And by 2018, I think we'll be negative on working capital. So in the time we've got left, what we wanted to do was talk to you or maybe tell you about some of the conversations we have internally about what could this kind of engagement model mean for the industrial economy if this were to become more common. And we discuss it on 3 dimensions: wealth and income inequality, productivity, and technology disruption. Just to touch on the last one, which might be the least clear, is the idea is that technology is great unless you're the blue-collar worker who's getting disrupted. And if we can get our employees using their whole brains, like Scott Nuttall likes to say, and get them behaving like employee owners, they are less likely to get disrupted and more likely to survive alongside of technology. And I'll give an example of that. So starting with inequality. We all know there's a massive inequality problem in the country, and broad-based ownership could be a part of the solution. We wanted to illustrate what this can mean for people by touching on Capital Safety. This was a business we bought in 2012. They make fall protection equipment, so like the safety harness and the cabling system you see this gentleman wearing on the top of a wind tower. We owned the business for 3.5 years and sold it to 3M. When we initially bought the business, though, this was what the picture looked like, so very similar to CHI. 1,250 employees, 35 people had ownership. The vast majority were hourly workers in the plants and the distribution centers making $14 to $18 an hour. Those 35 people, when we bought the business, got a payout of $157 million. and 2 people got 60 of the 157 million. So again, a microcosm of the industrial economy more broadly. So we rolled out our engagement model, our broad-based ownership, our operational improvement program, and it was a great investment for our investors, and it was a fantastic outcome for the employees when we sold the business. So we went from only 35 people even participating in ownership to 204 making more than $100,000, and 44 making more than $1 million. And if you're worried about the top 2 people in the lower left here, they actually made more money with us than they did in the prior deal. So this can work. Everyone can participate in value creation. We wanted to play one other video. This one's about 90 seconds long, and this is some footage that was captured inside of our Red Wing, Minnesota plant. And this is the moment that the employees find out what their equity is worth. This is the first time they hear that news, if you can play that video.
When the announcement was made, we were listening, and when he said the amount, my heart stopped. I looked around at all of the people that I knew, and some of them were crying. And I knew how much some of them really needed help. And it was just really touching to see. And I think I was more excited for everyone else than I even was for myself. One girl, who's a single mom of 2, had never had a new car, and she was 45 years old, and she got a brand new car, her first one ever, and she was so excited. And there was another girl who had been married for about, I think, 4 years. And she and her husband had never had a honeymoon, and they went on a honeymoon.
To see people jumping for joy, tears of joy, coming up and hugging you because of this great news that you're able to give them, it really was one of the most rewarding days I think I will ever have in my life.
So one of the unexpected benefits of this program was the impact it had on our senior leadership teams and how much easier it became to drive operational improvement and break down barriers to change. And that gentleman, Kevin Copland, at the end, who ran the US business for us, once we rolled out the program, it just kind of became all about how do we maximize the value of the equity and really deliver for our people. Now, although it has nothing to do with inequality, we can't pass up the opportunity to show you the results again. Just like CHI, 4th private equity firm to own Capital Safety, margins were already really good in the mid-20s. These are EBITDA margins. And you can see in 3.5 years, we took them from the mid-20s to almost 40%. People would have said that was impossible. And Craig tells me you are, there's some people here who are tough critics, and we need to show a little bit more data. So just so you don't think we're cherry picking, this is the last 5 industrial deals we've done. And you can see the margin improvement on the low end has been 600 basis points, and on the high end has been over 1,000 basis points. And 3 of these businesses had been owned by private equity firms. So moving on to productivity, this is probably intuitive that engaged employee owners will be more productive employees, but wanted to give you one example. I love to talk about Gardner Denver because this was a public company in 2013, and at the time, there were 6,000 employees and there were 86 people with ownership in the company, 86 out of 6,000. We took the company private, rolled out this engagement model. We've now taken it and transformed the company during the years it was private. It's now public, 6,400 employees, everyone's an owner in the company. The least amount of ownership anyone has is equivalent to about 70% of their annual compensation. So totally changed culture. And the CEO, Vicente, and I spent some time after the IPO thinking about how we could prove to Wall Street that as a result of this engagement model, we could, in a differentiated way, execute on an operational improvement agenda. And we wanted to find something that we could really take a metric and move it in the right direction rapidly by working through all 6,400 engaged employee owners. We picked net working capital for a bunch of reasons. One is that everyone touches working capital in some way between receivables, payables, and inventory. 2 is these are reasonably easily understood concepts because everyone's got inventory at home in their pantry and they all have bills to pay, so they all have payables. And you can really explain this stuff to people even if they've not got formal training. And then lastly, there's a lot of room for improvement. So Gardner Denver forever has had over 30% of revenue in working capital, and when we started had almost 32%. And if we drove the improvement we thought we could, it would free up hundreds of millions of dollars of cash to reinvest in the business. So we really went after this starting about a year ago. We took a train the trainer approach, which means you basically establish master trainers in your company. They go around the world training new trainers, and then they train the rest of your employee base. So with just a few steps, you can actually reach all 6,400 employees. We did a lot of measurement and reporting so that people knew on inventory, for example, how we were doing by facility, by product line every week. And then lots of ongoing communication, not just ongoing training, but also celebrating success. We found this is a big way to drive engagement and to build on quick wins. So we had a film crew basically follow our management team around and capture these moments, and we created little ceremonies out of them, and then we take the video, translate it into a bunch of languages, and zap it around the world, and we found that creates positive followership. So I won't play any of the videos in the interest of time, but we've got dozens of these. This example is of a woman named Holly in our Redditch UK facility. After her training, she went out and resolved a bunch of 5-year-old accounts receivable that aggregates to £1 million. Again, people would have said that just would not be possible. And of course, the message to all the employee base is just imagine if everyone would behave this way. So we just started this, but we've already taken 230 basis points out of working capital. Gardner Denver's public will be announcing results, second quarter results soon. If you're interested, you can see how we're doing on this metric. And then finally, technology disruption. If we go back to Larry, the truck driver at CHI, if all Larry is doing is picking up garage doors and dropping them off at customer sites, someday that will get disrupted by autonomous vehicles. But think of all the things a human being can do that a computer or a robot can't do. So one is identifying improvement opportunities. So our truck drivers are now constantly coming up with ways to load and unload doors or improve our route efficiency, something a computer can't as easily do if it takes creativity. Second is, another thing a computer can't do is actually get out of the truck at every stop and physically unload the doors. We're the only company that does this because we've got this unique relationship with our drivers. And it's a huge differentiator and a huge productivity benefit to our customers. They can provide competitive intelligence to us so that when they are dropping off doors, they're in the customer's warehouses and they can see our share of wallet, whether there's been competitive entry, et cetera. They can also serve and do serve as a feedback loop on quality. When they are unloading the doors, they take note of dented panels, missing hardware, et cetera, report it back to the plant, and so we can fix the problem before it spreads. And lastly, another thing a computer can't do is serve as another source of customer relationships. So these guys are almost like second-line salespeople in the job that they do. And the point in all this is that even if we had autonomous vehicles, as engaged employee owners, they're delivering so much value, we would still have them sitting in the truck doing all of these things, even if the truck was driving itself. So as I mentioned at the outset, this is very much a work in progress. We've started in US industrials. We are working globally and across business lines to see where this could have other applicability. We're honored that Harvard and Rutgers have taken note of what we're doing and are starting to study what we're doing and are helping us isolate the performance improvement impact related directly to employee engagement. So with that, I hope we've done a decent job of proving to you that we're doing a whole lot more than just levering up companies and hoping multiples go up. Hopefully I've given you some sense for just how deeply involved we get with our businesses once we buy them. As Henry likes to say, that's when the hard work really starts, is after you make the acquisition. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my partner, Ralph Rosenberg.